The dead make excellent company when you're trying to study. They're quiet, respectful of boundaries, and never ask to borrow your notes. These were the thoughts I comforted myself with during my first week as the night watchman at Oakwood Cemetery, a sprawling Victorian burial ground on the outskirts of Boston that had seen better days, as had most of its permanent residents. "The hours are 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Read, Mr. Fink," Conroy had said when he hired me, his weathered face creased with skepticism as he looked over my application. "You sure a university boy like you can handle the graveyard shift?" I'd nodded, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "Yes, sir. It's perfect, actually. Quiet time to work on my thesis." What I didn't tell him was that I needed the solitude as much as the money. At 23, I was the youngest in my graduate program in folklore studies, perpetually broke, and increasingly convinced that I related better to stories about the dead than to most living people. "Suit yourself," Conroy had shrugged. "Just do the hourly rounds, keep the gate locked, and call if anything seems off. Kids sometimes try to sneak in on dares. Homeless folks, too, seeking shelter." He'd handed me a ring of ancient-looking keys, a flashlight, and a worn leather-bound ledger. "The names and locations of everyone interred here. 150 years of Boston's history. Treat it with respect." And so began my nightly routine. I'd arrive as dusk settled over the cemetery, nodding goodbye to Conroy as he shuffled to his truck. I'd make my first round along the cobblestone paths, between tilting headstones and moss-covered angels, past family mausoleums with names that grace Boston's oldest institutions. Then I'd settle into the small caretaker's cottage near the entrance, a Victorian relic itself with drafty windows and creaking floorboards, to work on my thesis on death rituals in New England folklore. It was, as academic advisors like to say, a perfect synergy of employment and research interests. What they really meant was that I was the only grad student desperate enough to take a job that kept me awake all night among the dead. I didn't mind. There was a peaceful quality to Oakwood at night, the way moonlight silvered the weathered marble, how autumn leaves whispered across forgotten graves. I'd always found comfort in quiet, liminal spaces, and what was more liminal than a cemetery? The ultimate threshold between worlds. It was during my third week, on a particularly chilly October night, when I first noticed the flowers on Plot 99. I wouldn't have paid special attention except that I had just finished cataloging that section for my thesis research. Plot 99 was an unmarked grave in the oldest corner of the cemetery, dating to the 1870s according to the ledger, but while its neighbors were neglected with tilting headstones and overgrown lichen, Plot 99 had fresh chrysanthemums placed carefully at its head. It struck me as odd. Most graves this old had no living visitors. Extended families moved away, subsequent generations forgot. Life continued while the dead remained, yet someone cared enough about this anonymous grave to bring flowers. Curious, I checked the ledger that night. The entry for Plot 99 was sparse, male, approximate. 19 years. November 1878. No name, no cause of death, just a date and a vague description. Even by Victorian standards, it seemed unusually sparse. I made a mental note to ask Conroy about it, but forgot until 3 nights later when I found the chrysanthemums replaced with fresh ones, white this time instead of yellow. "Do we get many visitors at night?" I asked Conroy during our shift change the following evening. He looked at me like I'd suggested the headstones were dancing. "At night? No one except kids up to no good." "Why?" "Someone's leaving flowers on one of the older graves. Plot 99. The unmarked one." Conroy's expression changed subtly. "Ah, that one." He busied himself with his coat buttons. "There's always been flowers on that grave, long as I've worked here. 27 years now." "But who leaves them?" I pressed. "The record is so vague. Male, 1878. No name, no history." He shrugged. "Some graves keep their secrets, Reed." "Some visitors, too. Maybe someone knows something we don't." With that cryptic remark, he'd left me to my shift, the question of Plot 99, and its mysterious visitor lingering in my mind as I made my rounds. The answer, or what I initially thought was the answer, came a week later on a night when fog rolled thick through the cemetery, transforming the familiar landscape into something from a Gothic novel. The marble angels loomed suddenly out of the mist, their features ghostly and indistinct. Mausoleums became shadowy fortresses, and the rustle of leaves sounded unnervingly like whispered conversations. I was making my midnight round, flashlight beam cutting weakly through the fog, when I saw a figure by plot 99. My first thought was that I'd finally caught our mysterious flower-bringer, perhaps an elderly descendant who preferred privacy, or a historical society member with a particular interest in this forgotten soul. I approached quietly, not wanting to startle them. The figure, a young man from what I could see, was kneeling by the grave, head bowed. He wasn't placing flowers, but rather seemed to be arranging the existing ones, touching the petals with unusual tenderness. "Excuse me," I called softly when I was a few yards away. "The cemetery is closed to visitors." The figure didn't startle as I'd expected. Instead, he rose with fluid grace and turned toward me. In the flashlight's glow I could see he was indeed young, around my age, perhaps younger, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and remarkably pale skin. His clothes were odd, not quite modern, with a high-collared shirt and vest that seemed faintly anachronistic. "I know," he said, his voice clear and melodic against the night stillness. "I'm not precisely a visitor." His choice of words struck me as peculiar. "The grounds are closed after sunset," I repeated, suddenly aware of how alone we were amid the fog and graves. The young man smiled, a gentle expression that somehow put me at ease despite the strangeness of our encounter. "I'm aware of the hours. I've been here quite a while." He gestured vaguely around us. "I live here, after a fashion." I frowned, wondering if I was dealing with someone confused or possibly homeless. "In the cemetery?" "In a manner of speaking." His smile deepened, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "My name is Eli. You're the new caretaker." It wasn't a question. I nodded cautiously. "Oliver Reed. I started a few weeks ago." "I know. You replaced Mr. Finch, who retired after his heart gave him a warning. Before him was Mrs. Clemens, who only stayed a month. She found the nights too unsettling." He recited this history with casual confidence. "You're different, though. You find comfort here." A chill that had nothing to do with the October air crept along my spine. "How would you know that?" "I observe. It's what I do, having little else to occupy my time." He gestured to a nearby bench, a Victorian ironwork piece placed along the path. "May we sit? It's been some time since I've had a proper conversation." Against my better judgment, and possibly against cemetery protocol regarding mysterious nighttime encounters, I found myself sitting beside him. The fog wrapped around us like a cocoon, isolating our small section of the cemetery in a private, misty world. "You're not going to rob me, are you?" I asked, attempting humor to mask my unease. "Because a graduate student's wallet is a disappointing target." Eli laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to momentarily push back the fog. "I have no interest in your possessions, Oliver Reed. Though I am curious about your studies. Folklore, isn't it? With a particular interest in how the living remember the dead." My unease deepened. I hadn't told anyone at the cemetery the specific focus of my research. "How could you possibly know that?" "I see your books when you work in the cottage. I pass by sometimes." He spoke as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Your thesis seems fascinating, especially your chapter on cemetery symbolism, though I think you've misinterpreted the broken column motif on the Henderson mausoleum." Now I was truly unsettled. My notes on the Henderson symbolism were in my private journal, never shown to anyone. I shifted slightly away from him on the bench. "Who are you, really? Some kind of academic rival spying on my research? A particularly dedicated cemetery enthusiast?" Eli's expression sobered. "I told you. I live here." He gestured toward plot 99. That's my residence, so to speak. I stared at him, then at the grave, then back at him, a cold understanding beginning to dawn. Either this young man was mentally unwell and harboring a delusion, or he was playing an elaborate prank. You're claiming to be the occupant of that grave? A man who died in 1878? I'm not claiming anything, merely stating a fact. His voice remained calm, reasonable. I died on November 12, 1878. Pleurisy, complicated by a heart condition, quite common in those days, though no less uncomfortable for its commonality. I should have walked away then. Should have called Conroy, or campus security, or whoever one calls when confronted with a stranger claiming to be a 145-year-old corpse. Instead, I found myself asking, if you're who you say you are, how are we having this conversation? Eli looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between curiosity and hope. That's a complex question. The simplest answer is that certain people can perceive those who exist between worlds. Most humans are firmly anchored in life, their senses attuned only to their own reality. But some, like you, Oliver, stand with one foot slightly over the threshold. I'm very much alive, I protested. Are you? He tilted his head, studying me with unusual intensity. Have you never wondered why you're drawn to places like this? Why you feel more at home among the dead than the living? Why the liminal calls to you? His question struck uncomfortably close to thoughts I'd had, but never articulated. I stood abruptly, needing distance from the stranger and his unsettling insights. I should continue my rounds, I said stiffly. Eli remained seated, seemingly unbothered by my retreat. You'll return, he said with quiet certainty. The threshold walkers always do. We recognize our own. I walked away quickly, pulse hammering in my temples, convinced I'd encountered either an extremely convincing prankster or someone with elaborate delusions. Yet as I glanced back through the fog, the bench where we'd sat was empty, as if Eli had vanished into the mist itself. That night, I pored over the cemetery ledger again, searching for any additional information on Plot 99. There was nothing beyond what I'd already found, just that sparse entry. Male, approximate, 19 years. November 1878. I told myself I wouldn't return to that section of the cemetery unless necessary for my rounds. I told myself the encounter was simply an unusual anecdote for my thesis acknowledgments, an example of how burial grounds inspire the imagination. I lasted exactly 2 nights before curiosity drew me back to Plot 99. The fog had lifted, replaced by a clear autumn night with stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. The chrysanthemums were still there, but now I wondered if I had placed them myself in some fugue state, creating evidence to support an imagined encounter. You're back, said a now familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Eli standing a few feet away, looking exactly as he had before. The same antiquated clothes, the same pale skin luminous in the moonlight, the same expectant expression. I'm not convinced you're real, I said bluntly. He smiled. A reasonable position. I'm not entirely convinced of it myself some nights. Despite my reservations, I found myself relaxing in his presence. Whatever or whoever he was, Eli exuded a calm that was contagious. If you're really from 1878, prove it. Tell me something only someone from that time would know. An understandable request, but flawed, he replied, falling into step beside me as we walked along the path. Anything I might say could be researched by a dedicated historian. And memory is imperfect, even for those of us with an abundance of time to reflect. I had to acknowledge his point. Then tell me something about me that you couldn't possibly know. His gaze turned thoughtful. You have a small scar behind your right ear from falling out of a tree when you were 8. You were trying to rescue a neighbor's cat. The cat descended on its own after you fell. My steps faltered. The incident had happened during a summer visit to my grandmother's house in Maine. I'd never told anyone at the university about it, and the scar was hidden by my hair. How could you possibly? I told you, he said gently. Threshold walkers perceive what others can't, including sometimes each other's truths. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a strange sense of recognition, as if a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. What exactly is a threshold walker? Someone who exists partially in multiple worlds. For me, it's because I died while straddling a significant transition. I was neither child nor fully adult, neither entirely sick nor completely well until the final moment. For you? He paused, weighing his words. I suspect there's something tethering you between states of being. You're suggesting I'm partly dead? It should have sounded absurd, yet the words resonated with an uncomfortable familiarity. I'm suggesting you're uniquely positioned to perceive the in-between. He stopped walking, turning to face me. Few living people have ever seen me, Oliver. Fewer still have conversed with me. Only those with one foot already across the threshold. A memory surfaced, a doctor's visit 2 years ago, concerns about unexplained headaches and vision changes, tests that were interrupted when my insurance lapsed. Tests I'd never returned to complete. This is insane, I murmured, more to myself than to him. Perhaps, but insanity rarely presents with such consistent internal logic. He smiled again, that same gentle expression. Would it help if I proved my incorporeality? Before I could answer, he reached toward a nearby headstone and passed his hand directly through the solid marble. The moonlight caught the motion, revealing how his fingers became momentarily translucent where they intersected with the stone. Oh my God, I whispered, backing away. You're actually dead? Yes, for quite some time now. He regarded me with calm interest. Does that disturb you? It should have. It absolutely should have. Instead, I found myself oddly transfixed. No, I admitted. It makes me curious. His smile widened. That's why you can see me, I think. Your curiosity creates openings where others have only solid barriers. We talked until dawn approached, sitting on that same bench while the stars wheeled overhead. Eli told me about Boston in the 1870s, the sounds and smells of a different century, the clothes and customs, the books he'd loved, and the music that had moved him. He described his short life with a poet's sensibility, painting vivid pictures of a world long vanished. In return, I told him about the modern world, about technologies he couldn't have imagined, social changes that would have seemed impossible in his time, music and art that had transformed the cultural landscape. He listened with rapt attention, asking insightful questions that made me see my own era with fresh eyes. As the eastern sky began to lighten, he stood. I should go. Daylight makes it difficult for me to maintain this form. Will you be back tomorrow night? I asked, surprised by how much I hoped the answer would be yes. I'm always here, Oliver. Whether you see me or not depends on you. He hesitated, then added, the flowers. I appreciate them, though I've never understood who leaves them. I thought it was you, I admitted. He shook his head. Perhaps another threshold walker. There have been others over the years, though none who could see me as clearly as you do. With that, he walked toward plot 99, his figure growing less distinct with each step. By the time he reached the grave, he had faded entirely, leaving me alone with the rising sun and a mind full of impossible questions. In the weeks that followed, my nights took on a new rhythm. I'd complete my first rounds, work on my thesis for a few hours, then meet Eli near plot 99. Sometimes we would walk the cemetery paths together, his knowledge of the grounds and their occupants proving invaluable for my research. Other nights we would sit and talk until dawn threatened, exploring differences and similarities between our worlds and experiences. I began to notice things about him beyond his historical insights, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how he gestured expressively when describing something that moved him, the careful attention he paid to my words. I found myself thinking about our conversations during my daylight hours, looking forward to night with an anticipation that both exhilarated and concerned me. Is it possible, I asked one night in early November, for the living and the dead to form attachments? We were sitting beneath a massive oak tree, its few remaining leaves occasionally drifting down around us. Eli looked up at the question, something vulnerable flashing across his features. "It has happened," he said carefully, "though it rarely ends well for the living." "What do you mean?" He sighed, a surprisingly human sound from someone who didn't technically need to breathe. "The dead exist in a different stream of time than the living. We don't change, not really. I am eternally as I was in 1878, 19 years old, with all the limitations of my time and experience, but you will continue to grow, to evolve, to age. Some things transcend time," I suggested. "Perhaps." His smile held a sadness that made my chest ache. "But the living must live, Oliver. It's what defines you." I wanted to argue, to insist that whatever was growing between us could overcome such metaphysical obstacles. Instead, I asked, "Are there others like you here?" "Other ghosts?" "Many," he confirmed. "Though most are mere impressions, emotional echoes repeating the same patterns. Few retain consciousness as I do. Fewer still can interact with the living." "What makes you different?" He considered the question. "Unfinished business, the stories say, but I don't believe that's it. I think some souls simply refuse the natural order." "We cling to consciousness out of stubbornness, or curiosity, or—" He paused. "Or what?" I prompted. "Or loneliness," he finished quietly. "I wasn't ready to leave. I'd seen so little of the world, experienced so few of its wonders. Read too few books, heard too little music, loved—" He trailed off, looking away. "Well, some things remain consistent across centuries." The implication hung in the cool night air between us. I thought about reaching for his hand, then remembered the way his fingers had passed through solid stone. What would happen if I tried to touch him? Would my hand pass through as well, or was there some substance to him for someone like me, a threshold walker, as he called it? Before I could gather the courage to find out, the familiar pressure began building behind my right eye, a headache that had been increasing in frequency over the past weeks. I winced, pressing my fingers against my temple. "You're in pain," Eli observed, concern evident in his voice. "It's nothing. Just a headache." I forced a smile. "Hazard of graduate school." His expression remained troubled. "It's more than that, I think. How long have you had these episodes?" "On and off for a couple of years." I shrugged, trying to downplay the increasing severity. "I had some tests once, but never followed up." "You should," he said with unexpected intensity. "Promise me you'll see a doctor, Oliver." His concern touched me. "I will, when the semester ends and I have better insurance." He didn't look reassured, but let the subject drop as we returned to discussing the symbolism of the weeping willow carvings on nearby headstones. Yet I caught him watching me more closely afterward, his gaze lingering whenever I rubbed my temple or squinted against the pane. The following night, Eli didn't appear at our usual meeting place. I waited by plot 99 for over an hour, an unexpected hollowness growing in my chest at his absence. Finally, I continued my rounds, telling myself that even ghosts probably needed solitude sometimes. As I passed the caretaker's cottage, I noticed a light burning in Conroy's office, unusual, since he rarely returned during the night shift. Curious, I knocked lightly on the door. "Come in, Reed," he called. I found him hunched over ancient records, papers spread across his desk. He looked up as I entered, his weathered face unusually grave. "Sir? I didn't expect to see you tonight." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, son. I've been doing some digging." I complied, a sense of unease growing. "About what?" "Plot 99. He pushed a yellowed newspaper clipping toward me. "Found this in the archives. Thought you might want to see it, given your interest." The clipping was from the Boston Globe, dated November 1878. The headline read, "Promising Young Scholar Succumbs to Illness." Beneath it was a grainy photograph of a solemn-faced young man with dark hair falling across his forehead. Despite the poor quality and antiquated style, I recognized him immediately. Eli. My hands trembled slightly as I read the short obituary. Elias Sullivan, age 19, passed on the way after a brief but severe illness. Mr. Sullivan was known for his brilliant mind and gentle disposition, having distinguished himself at university despite humble origins. His professors speak highly of his potential as a poet and scholar. With no family to claim him, Mr. Chan, Sullivan will be interred at Oakwood Cemetery through the charity of his academic mentors. A small service was held among faculty and fellow students who admired his character and mourned his untimely passing. I stared at the photograph, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. Conroy watched me with unusual intensity. "Familiar to you, is he?" he asked quietly. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Conroy leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I've worked here a long time, Reed. Long enough to know that Oakwood keeps its own counsel about certain matters." He tapped the clipping. "Every few years, someone comes along who takes a special interest in Plot 99. Someone who starts looking tired during day hours but strangely alert at night. Someone who spends a lot of time in the oldest section, sometimes talking when there's nobody there to hear." My mouth went dry. "You think I'm imagining things?" "I think cemeteries exist at crossroads, between life and death, memory and forgetting, past and present." His tone was surprisingly gentle. "I also think you should get those headaches checked out, son." I stared at him. "How did you—" "I noticed things." He shuffled the papers together, sliding them into a folder. "My predecessor told me to watch for the signs when I took this job. Now I'm telling you, see a doctor. Soon." "What signs?" I demanded. "What are you talking about?" Conroy sighed heavily. "Those who see Elias Sullivan don't tend to stay among the living very long afterward. Not because of anything he does, by all accounts, he's a gentle soul, but because only those already close to crossing can perceive him clearly." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "You've seen him too?" "Glimpses over the years. Never clear enough to speak with." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "My aunt could see him, though. The summer before she passed from a brain aneurysm. Said he was excellent company during her night shifts." The pressure behind my eye intensified, as if responding to his words. Brain aneurysm. The diagnosis the doctor had mentioned as a possibility during my incomplete examination 2 years ago. "The flowers," I said suddenly. "If not from him or me, then who?" "From those who came before you. Those who passed over." Conroy's expression softened. "Each new caretaker who sees him leaves them, until they can't anymore. Then another comes along eventually, and the cycle continues. It's been happening since before my time." I left Conroy's office with the newspaper clipping and a terrible understanding. The headaches, the strange affinity for liminal spaces, my ability to see Eli, all symptoms not of some metaphysical gift, but of a medical condition slowly killing me. That night, I returned to Plot 99 with fresh chrysanthemums and a heart full of conflicted emotions. Eli was waiting, his expression solemn. "You know," he said simply. I nodded, placing the flowers carefully at the head of his grave. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed that your medical condition was what allowed you to see me? Or would you have dismissed everything as hallucination?" He stepped closer. "I wondered the time we had." "How many others have there been?" I asked. "How many threshold walkers who could see you?" 12 over the years, each one special in their own way. His voice softened. "None quite like you. And they all died." "Everyone dies, Oliver. Some sooner than others." I laughed bitterly. "That's cold comfort." "It's reality," he replied gently. "The question is what you'll do with the knowledge." I looked at him, really looked at him. In the moonlight, he was beautiful and impossible, and somehow the most real thing in my increasingly uncertain existence. "If I get treatment," I said slowly, "if they find the aneurysm and fix it, you'll almost certainly lose the ability to see me," he finished. the threshold will close. And if I don't, the words stuck in my throat, you'll join me eventually, sooner rather than later. No judgment colored his voice, just quiet acceptance. I won't tell you which to choose, Oliver. I can't. I reached toward him hesitantly, my fingertips stopping just short of where his cheek appeared to be. Can I? He nodded, understanding my unasked question. You can try. Sometimes, at this stage, there's enough overlap between our worlds. Slowly I closed the distance. Instead of passing through emptiness, my fingers met what felt like cool mist shaped into the suggestion of solid form, not quite tangible, but not entirely incorporeal either. Eli's eyes widened slightly at the contact. I can feel that, he whispered, wonder in his voice. It's been so long since I've felt anything. Something broke open inside me. I stepped closer, my hand curving around the misty approximation of his cheek. If I stay, I said hoarsely, if I don't get treatment, how long would we have? Months, perhaps. A year at most, according to the patterns I've observed. His expression was pained. Don't ask me to be the reason you make that choice, Oliver. I've watched too many cross over already. But we would be together after, I pressed. On the same side of the threshold. Perhaps. The afterlife has rules I don't fully understand, even after all this time. He placed his own hand over mine, a whisper of pressure against my skin. But I can't ask you to die for the mere possibility. What if it's my choice? The headache was intensifying, but I barely noticed it now. What if I decide that months with you, with the possibility of more after, is worth more than decades without you? Then I would say you're making a choice from a position of illness, not clarity. His smile was unbearably sad. If I could live for you, I would. If I could take your place, I would do it in a heartbeat I no longer have. The selflessness in his words cut through my desperate reasoning. I stepped back, dropping my hand. You want me to get treatment. To live. I want you to have the chance I never did, he corrected. To grow older, to experience the world in all its fullness. To love someone who can love you completely, not just in whispers and moonlight. What if I already do? The words escaped before I could reconsider them. His expression softened. Then honor that feeling by living, Oliver. The truly dead have eternity. The living have only moments. Don't sacrifice yours. We stood in silence, the weight of impossible choices hanging between us. Finally, I nodded. I'll make an appointment. Tomorrow. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. But I want what time we have left, I added. Every night until I can't see you anymore. Stories, conversation, whatever is possible between our worlds. I would like that very much. His smile was brighter now, though tinged with the knowledge of our approaching separation. Perhaps we can even solve the mystery of who began leaving the flowers. A final research project together. I managed a smile in return. A footnote for my thesis, special thanks to Elias Sullivan, whose insights from beyond the grave proved invaluable. He laughed, the sound light against the cemetery's stillness. Imagine the committee's reaction to that acknowledgement. As we walked among the graves that night, I found myself memorizing everything about him. The way moonlight seemed to pass partially through him, how his expression shifted when discussing poetry he'd loved in life, the careful way he observed the modern world through my descriptions. I knew our time was limited, that each conversation brought us closer to a final goodbye. Yet there was a peace in the knowledge, too, an acceptance that some connections transcend ordinary boundaries, even if they can't be sustained in conventional ways. Eli had existed in this in-between state for nearly 150 years, touching the lives of those teetering on the threshold like me. Perhaps there was a purpose to that, a meaning beyond mere happenstance. In the weeks that followed, as medical appointments confirmed Conroy's suspicions and surgery was scheduled, Eli and I created our own small world within Oakwood's boundaries. I brought him books to describe, music to explain, stories of a century he would never directly experience. He shared forgotten histories, perspectives from a vanished time, and a particular way of seeing beauty in stillness that changed how I viewed my own mortality. The night before my surgery, I brought a single chrysanthemum to plot 99. Eli met me there, his form seeming more substantial than usual, or perhaps it was my perception sharpening as my condition progressed. "I'm afraid," I admitted, placing the flower beside his headstone. "Not of dying exactly, but of losing you." "I'll still be here," he said softly, "whether you can see me or not." "Will you know, if I come back to visit?" "I believe I will." He moved closer, his presence creating that now familiar cool sensation in the air around me. Some connections persist, even across the threshold. "If it doesn't work," I said, voicing my deepest fear, "if something goes wrong tomorrow, then I'll be waiting," he promised. "But it won't come to that. You have too much living still to do." I reached for him one last time, marveling at the strange halfway touch we could share, neither fully tangible nor completely incorporeal. "In another life, another time, in another life," he agreed, "we might have had something remarkable." His smile held a century of patient wisdom. Perhaps we still did, in our way. Dawn approached too quickly, bringing with it our inevitable parting. As Eli began to fade with the coming light, he pressed something into my hand, a sensation more like a memory of pressure than physical contact. "For luck," he whispered, already more transparent than solid. When he had vanished completely, I opened my palm to find a perfectly formed maple seed, the kind children call helicopters for the way they spin through the air. How he had managed to give me a physical object I couldn't explain. Perhaps it had always been there, and I simply hadn't noticed it until he drew my attention to it. Or perhaps, as I prefer to believe, the rules between worlds were more flexible than either of us fully understood. I underwent surgery the following day. When I returned to Oakwood Cemetery 3 weeks later, my head still bandaged, but my prognosis excellent, I walked directly to plot 99. The chrysanthemums I'd left were withered now, so I replaced them with fresh ones. I stood there for a long time, waiting, hoping. But the veil between worlds had closed with my healing. Eli remained on his side of the threshold, invisible to my now firmly anchored living senses. "I kept my promise," I said aloud, feeling somewhat foolish but needing to say the words anyway. "I chose life, like you wanted. I hope you can hear me somehow." Only cemetery silence answered, but as I turned to leave, a sudden breeze stirred the trees overhead. A single maple seed spiraled down, landing precisely at my feet, an echo of the one still kept safely in my wallet. Coincidence, most would say. A natural occurrence easily explained by autumn winds and probability. But I knew better. The dead make excellent company when you're trying to study, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, they remain good company even when you can no longer see them. I visit plot 99 regularly now, bringing fresh flowers and updates on my life. I completed my thesis with a chapter dedicated to the phenomenon of cemetery guardians like Eli, and began teaching folklore at a small college nearby. On quiet nights, I sometimes sit by his grave and read aloud from books he never had the chance to experience in life. And occasionally, very occasionally, when the night is still and the threshold between worlds seems particularly thin, I feel the whisper of a presence beside me, a gentle reminder that some connections persist, even when everything logical insists they shouldn't. The living have only moments, as Eli said. But I've learned that sometimes a moment can contain eternity.